Great news, guys. Emmanuel Macron just made a statement that he will be going to Russia to come up with a quote historical solution to the Ukraine crisis. And people say that the French are arrogant. Meanwhile, the US is like, let's send thousands of troops to the Russian border. That's going to de-escalate things for sure, especially with the way that we've been talking about Russia in the news media for the last 5 years. And by the way, we haven't had a full-blown war in such a long time, so now the time is ripe. At the same time, Putin on the other side of Ukraine is increasing the Russian forces by tens of thousands every single week. Like he's the luckiest risk player in the world, getting those 3 cards you need to get the most amount of troops. And while Russia, the US and NATO are all going like, we're stronger, no, we're stronger, President Zelensky of Ukraine is the only one going like, calm down, guys. We've seen this before. This is Russia. It's no big deal. Let's all take a deep breath. Let's not shatter my country's economy just for the fun of it. Alright guys, welcome to the channel. So I know I had a little bit of fun with that, but that's actually some serious news breaking around this whole issue. So let's get right into it. I find it really weird that we live in a time now where a lot of politicians in the West and especially in the US seem to be longing for a conflict or even a war within Europe. It's pretty crazy. And it's ironic that in this time, the most reasonable voice, the one trying to calm everyone down, is President Zelensky of Ukraine. And of course, ironic because it's his country that's under the threat of a Russian invasion. But he's still trying to calm every one of these world leaders down. Take a look at the CNN article talking about this very issue. Ukraine's President Zelensky urges world leaders to tone down rhetoric on threat of war with Russia. He's like, calm down, guys, because they're being a bit hyperbolic about this whole issue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Friday other world leaders have been overstating the likelihood of war between his country and Russia, causing panic and destabilizing Kiev's economy. Speaking to foreign reporters Friday, Zelensky said he explained in a phone calls to world leaders like US President Joe Biden and France's Emmanuel Macron that though the threat from the Kremlin is imminent and constant, Ukrainians have learned to live with it since Moscow invaded in 2014, which is of course when Russian forces moved into Crimea and annexed that whole area into Russian possession. It says also here that when asked about his conversation with Biden, Zelensky thanked the US president for his support, but said the Russian troop buildup was not much more significant than what he had seen in the past. I'm the president of Ukraine, I'm based here, and I think I know the details deeper than any other president, Zelensky said. We don't have any misunderstandings with President Biden. I just deeply understand what is going on in my country. And then he says, and of course Biden deeply understands perfectly well what's going on in the US as well. So that's a stinger. That's him basically saying in a very nice way that he knows better. He knows what's going on, and that this talk about like hyperbolic talk about a war breaking out any moment, they keep using the words like imminent and the next day in the US media. He's saying that this is very reckless and it's very dangerous for countries involved. Now, of course, Zelensky is also trying to downplay the situation a little bit, like he least of anyone wants a conflict with Russia. It would basically crush his whole country, potentially. So of course he's trying to downplay. But so objectively speaking, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But if you're watching the American news media these days, they do use these hyperbolic words like imminent and it happens tomorrow or maybe the next day. And they've been saying that for months. So Zelensky is not buying that immediate way of talking about it. And the same with the Ukrainian stock market. It's pretty much been unaffected for the time of this whole crisis at the Ukrainian border, which also tells you that people who are investing are not as afraid as the news media is right now. I know it sells, CNN, but this is why people begin to call you fake news, because they can't trust you anymore. It has to be more objective, right? So let's talk about the actual threat from Russia into Ukraine. I asked you guys, and almost half of you thought that Russia looked very likely that they are preparing for war. And Russia has now ramped up their forces to be more than 140,000 troops. So it certainly could look that way. But keep in mind that Russia does have an army of more than 1 million troops, some of which is always placed along the neighboring nations' borders with Russia to protect the territorial integrity of Russia. So when President Zelensky is saying that this is pretty much nothing out of the ordinary, the Western medias are saying, well, we see 100,000 troops build up on or close to your border. But the Western media is including in that all of the Russian troops right now in Belarus. And the reason that the Russian troops are right now in Belarus is that they just had this huge international military operation called the Zapad 2021, which they make that operation every 4 years. So again, if you're looking at what Zelensky is saying and what the media is saying, I would tend to go a bit more with what Zelensky is saying. I'm not saying that they're lying, I'm just saying that this is a big news story and you can make a lot of money if you make it sound a little worse than it is. There's no denying that things are very tense right now on the border of Ukraine and inside of the country. I just think the news media has a tendency to blow things out of proportions, and that's not a good thing for all of the nations involved. It's actually very dangerous. What is a good thing, however, is that Putin is still showing a willingness during these times to meet with a president like Macron, who is going to Russia in the hopes of a historic solution. It's very interesting. Macron made this statement that he would go to Russia and he would bring back a historic solution to this whole Ukraine crisis. And it's interesting because that's a very strong statement on an ongoing issue like this. And it kind of makes me think that he already has some kind of deal or agreement pre-planned with Putin before he goes there. Because I think this is a strong statement, especially remember that Macron is in an election year. He's running a re-election campaign, and in just a couple of months, the French people will vote for their president. And if he fails on this big statement, that's not going to look good. It could ruin his re-election hopes. So I'm thinking that Macron knows something that you and I don't. That he already has some kind of deal with Putin, and that essentially he's going to Russia to flesh this out and to make sure that everything works and is official. And then they will announce in a matter of maybe a few days that Macron has had this great meeting with Putin and now they've come to an agreement. And if you think about it, that might have been Putin's plans all along, to use this provocation on the Ukrainian border to get better deals with the powerhouses of Europe like France and Germany. And now that seems to be working, because I doubt that Macron can go to Russia, get everything that he wants without giving something to Putin that Putin wants. And whatever that is, I don't know, but I imagine that it's got something to do with some agreement or some deal with these powerhouses in Europe. And I'm sure that he's going to get that with the French right now, because Macron would benefit greatly personally and get re-elected as president if he comes back with this historic solution. So it's a very big deal. What's interesting, however, is that you don't hear a lot from Germany during these times. Normally, Germany goes in lockstep with France in terms of weapons of war and where they send money and where they help other nations out. In this case, France has been very helpful to Ukraine and neighboring nations as well on borders with Russia, but Germany has been awfully quiet. So just yesterday or a couple of days ago, the new German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, was going to talk with Joe Biden. So he was going to Washington in the US, and he made this statement on why Germany hasn't sent any weapons or anything to Ukraine to help them out specifically on this issue. He said that there are strict export criteria we are following on the export of weapons into crisis regions. That's his official reason. And listen, technically and legally, he is right? But Germany keeps making these multi-billion euro weapons deals with Saudi Arabia, who is actively engaged with like human rights violations and a war in Yemen constantly. And they keep making and signing these huge deals which I won't go into right now because this video isn't about that. But if you're interested, you should check out this video that I made just a few months ago. It's really interesting about how Europe, but more specifically Germany, is selling, and France is selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, and they're using these weapons in illegal places. If I was to guess why Germany isn't helping out Ukraine in these times, I think it's got something to do with the supply of like oil and gas. Right now, Germany gets half of all of their oil and different natural gases from Russia. They're deeply dependent on the Russian supply line right now, especially at times where all of these German stocks of oil companies and natural gas companies is plummeting. It would be devastating if Russia decided to shut off something like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, or they decided to pressure Germany. If Germany decided to engage in this whole thing with Ukraine, Russia could easily pressure Germany into a financial crisis during these times. I think that's got a lot more to do with the reason why Germany isn't getting engaged than it has to do with like weapons export deals, and that you can like whatever reason Olaf Scholz made. I don't think that's the reason. It doesn't make sense. Something else that concerns me is how NATO is getting heavily involved in this whole issue. Because remember that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. They are trying and talking about becoming a member, but right now they're not. And all of the member nations of NATO have now sent troops to if not to Ukraine, then other countries surrounding Russia. And that's got to be scary if you're Russia, right? That you have all of these nations, including the US. The US is sending thousands of troops to the border of Russia. Just for a moment, take our Western hat off and imagine if Russia did the same. Like they said, they sent thousands of troops to Mexico, right on the border of the US. I don't think they would like it too much. And that's the situation Russia finds itself in right now. It's becoming dangerous, mostly, in my eyes, mostly for the fact that we have NATO troops now involved. And that means US troops. And if US troops gets into some kind of conflict, or they engage with Russian troops, and it's no longer just these proxy wars in the Middle East or in North Africa where they use mercenary armies, but it's directly Russians fighting US troops, and people die, all of a sudden you have a whole other scenario on your hands. And for the love of the good Lord above, I really hope that doesn't come to pass. But I want your thoughts on this. Comment in the comment section below and let me know what you think, because this is a very volatile situation that keeps changing all the time. So it would be interesting to hear you out and let your opinion be known as well. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.